Okay, folks, so I think it's time to make another video. I was going to make a video. That urge has been building and building. I've been reading the news while I search for, let's say, more productive use of my time, which was hard to find. To be honest, it was hard to find. I think I finally found it. But there's so much crazy shit going on in this world these days that I found it really hard to make videos about topics of interest to me that I thought were worth a video because I didn't want to take the time to actually make a video. And it's one thing to sit down and talk and create audio and so forth, and talk about things of interest, but it's a completely different thing to make video. Video content is very flighty. It takes time to find something worth looking at and record it and put it on the internet. And it's decreasing value when more and more people are making videos. But I think I found something recently, which I really want to say. As you may know, if you've been looking at my videos, I have spent a fair amount of time looking at this whole mess with Richard Spencer and the white supremacist movement, the alt-right movement in the United States. And one of the things I've been doing for a while, and it's because of the groundswell on which that came out of, is just looking at this whole issue of white privilege, of ways in which, I kind of hate to say this, but I guess this is, you need to get down to brass tacks, ways in which white people get away with doing and saying things which would, immediately have a minority at least on the back foot and quite often being prosecuted and incarcerated if they did the same thing, for the simple reason that there's always a presumption of innocence that's weighed towards the white person and the presumption of guilt that's weighed towards a minority in the United States. That is epitomized, and I would say you can't have a better example of this than Richard Spencer talking about how European society has led to this great country in the United States, but it's such a great country that we still need to have it, redone to preserve white people, and redone by basically eliminating minorities. How white people have done such a great job socially and economically, but they still need to get rid of all the minorities in the United States in order to survive. I mean, the guy is crazy, but it's sort of what we call white people crazy. It's the kind of crazy bullshit that a lot of white people talk, which just they get away with because they're white. It's that simple. And I think there's no better example of this than this recent case I saw in the news about a female police chief who lost her job for referring to white male privilege at a training session where a police officer took offense and he said, "I found it extremely offensive and I'm going to leave this training seminar." She's left this training seminar because a woman said he isn't seeing the crime levels in his life that are reported in average because of his white male privilege blindness to those crimes. And I don't see how you can talk about political correctness and the value of human work and effort and endeavor in our society any better than to see a white man persecute a white woman for talking about white male privilege and saying he found it offensive. All these men, all these white men in the United States of America are sitting around bitching about PC for losing their jobs and getting blacklisted for the slightest inappropriate comment or inappropriate action. And then this guy turns right around, puts the needle on a woman and accuses her of egregious harassment on the job because she dared to accuse him of benefiting from white male privilege. You can't do a better job of highlighting the hypocrisy of white men by doing that. So that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to mention real quickly is this whole Bitcoin thing. Now, I remember when I was a junior engineer dabbling in Bitcoin when it first came out. I remember, when PCs got to be cheap enough and people started having them, they started to use them for mathematical simulation and so forth. And we started looking at RSA key. I mean, there was a time and a place where people aggregated online to look at things like brute force RSA key hacking and so forth by compute sharing and across network connected PCs. And this is where Bitcoin really started, in this time frame. At the time, you could generate a Bitcoin fairly easily on a PC, and we're not talking about a super powerful like desktop PC like an i5 or an i7. We're talking about a 46 Pentium computer, okay, and could generate one fairly easily. And it was a fun thing to do. Run the software on your system, you generate Bitcoin. But Bitcoins were nearly valueless at the time. I remember this at the time. And one of the problems we had with this was you couldn't get anything for it. It was a fair amount of computing power to do this, there's no question, but they were almost worthless. It was a neat kind of game to play, but they were worthless. So I think at the time a lot of people got out of it because the software would hog up a fair amount of resources and so forth on your computer and slow you down when you're trying to play games or surf the internet. And it didn't produce anything of value. It was a more or less of a waste of time. Well, as you know now, the value of a Bitcoin has risen dramatically over that time. And now people are going, wow, man, I could have had $10,000. I had 10, 15, 20 Bitcoins on my computer. I could be a millionaire just from the price rise in Bitcoin. But the question we really should ask is, why has Bitcoin risen in value? There's two reasons why a commodity rises in value, okay? A sudden reduction in the amount of the commodity in the face of constant need, or a dramatic increase in the need given a constant supply, okay? The problem with Bitcoin is that either case is bad, okay? If Bitcoins are going up in value because people are losing them, then how is it a good idea to make them in the first place, okay? The value will always go up or down depending upon whether Bitcoins are generated or lost, but if you can't save them, what is the point in putting a lot of effort? And as we all know, if you know anything about Bitcoin, the effort to make a Bitcoin is supposed to rise exponentially with time. They're supposed to be dramatically much more difficult to make the next 50 Bitcoins than it was to make the first 50 Bitcoins, and so on and so forth. This is supposed to continue to be like a chain. So the problem we really have is, why did it suddenly go to 10,000? And I think the answer is that it went to 10,000 because people started finding new value, new applications for Bitcoin that they can't use dollars for and euros for and so forth. It's essentially an unregulated internet currency, okay? That's not taxed, not regulated, and it's difficult, much more difficult than dollars and euros to trace. So when people are investing in Bitcoin, they have to keep in mind, either in terms of making Bitcoin or investing in it, they have to keep in mind that what they're doing is funding essentially black market activity that's based on the internet. And that might be fine if that's what their business is. It might be fine for them, but for most of us, it's not fine. And I think the problem with Bitcoin these days is it has become essentially a way to undermine legitimate society in our country. We're lucky it's small now. This is a problem which hopefully will be nipped in the bud at some point. But at some point, we're going to see a significant power like Russia, which is heavily investing in bit mining, possibly China, possibly other organizations. We're going to see organizations like that start to go, wait. I'm making all these Bitcoins, but they're not going to have any value. They're certainly not going to draw future investment if all the activity, which is what the Bitcoin is being used for, suddenly becomes, so controversial that it stops. And this is a real problem. It's hard to see a government like Russia regulating criminal activity on one hand while profiting from that same criminal activity on the other hand. And this really does make me wonder if that's actually what Russia is all about in the first place. I think profit, the pursuit of profit, the greed of pursuit of profit is the downside of capitalism. Remember, it's what drove Marx. It drove the Bolsheviks, supposedly. It drove the communists in Asia. You know, the Mao Purge was all about driving out bourgeois pursuit of greed and the corruption of, you know, the ethical Chinese man, the ethical Russian citizen, and, you know, and comrade. And it was bad for the nation, bad for the country. And frankly, it is bad. There's no question that unchecked greed is bad. But if there's anything that's unchecked in terms of greed, it's going to be something like Bitcoin. That's the problem. Okay, so I really do think in the long run, you'll see a division between large entities which are pushing for deregulation and legitimization of illegal activities so they can profit from them in numerous ways, and those who are pushing for even stronger regulation, even stronger prosecution and litigation against these activities to preserve their way of life, to preserve their society. I think Bitcoin is going to be a bellwether for where we go as the human race goes, just as the alt-right and the white supremacist movement is going to be a bellwether for where we go. Because I really don't think that people can take these people seriously at the same time they take what they say seriously, okay? And we're going to find ourselves at a point in time where multiculturalism is going to hold sway, or criminal enterprise is going to hold sway, and criminal rationalization is going to hold sway. We're going to have to make a choice, one way or the other, to survive as a society. We're either going to be people treated as equals or people treated as commodities. It's that simple. And I think the next 5 to 10 years are going to be a very interesting time in this country, in our society, in our planet, as a matter of fact, as we see just what happens. Do we let greed run unchecked, largely because we can't control it, or do we take control and preserve our own society and our own health, our own way of life? We'll find out shortly.